couple of weeks ago, Mark Zuckerberg spent hours answering questions in front of congressional committees. David Brooks from the New York Times made an interesting comment about the questions that were asked in an article that he called "The Blindness of Social Wealth." Brooks points out that all the questions were about protecting our privacy, but nothing was asked about how Facebook and other social media companies feed an epidemic of loneliness and social isolation. It seems that this comment is a result of Brooks traveling the country in February, interviewing college students. And he wrote about that in an article entitled "A Generation Emerging from the Wreckage." And he wrote about how struck he was by the pervasive but subtle hunger that the students he interviewed have for a change in the emotional tenor of life. One student said, "We're more connected, but we're more apart." Again and again, students expressed a hunger for social and emotional bonding, for a shift from guilt and accusation towards empathy. And one student asked, "How do you create a relationship?" And Brooks wrote, "That may be the longing that undergirds all others." It seems our young people are longing for answers to their lack of connection. And they've discovered that technology just doesn't provide it like they thought it might. They are more connected, but more apart. What an amazing statement. Perhaps our second reading from John's letter answers some of their longings. "Love not in word or speech, but in deed and truth." Perhaps the gospel also answers, which tells that without a connection to a higher power, we can do nothing. We cannot bear good fruit. So perhaps young people can learn from a man by the name of Tom Catena, who seems to have found that answer. He played football for Brown University, graduated in '86 with an engineering degree, but then all of a sudden he changed course and became a doctor. In 2008, he made his way to Sudan to help with the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Since 2011, he's been on duty at Mother of Mercy Hospital in Gidal, a city in the Nuba Mountains of the Sudan, because indicted war criminal President Omar al-Bashir ordered the bombing of his own people. Dr. Catena's story is told in a documentary film entitled "The Heart of Nuba." He's a Catholic layman who lives his faith in a world of conflict with almost no humanitarian aid. He sleeps on a mattress on the floor of a small room stacked with unpacked boxes. He starts every day with Mass, the breviary, and rosary before he heads off to the hospital. By the end of the day, he has seen some 300 to 400 patients and performed numerous surgeries. He certainly does live out the challenge of the scriptures that we hear this weekend. He bears such good fruit because his total dependence on that higher power, on this God that we say we love. He's done just what these young people long for. He's moved from guilt and accusation to empathy. Obviously, few of us can do what he has done, but each of us, in our own way, each one of us is called to live out love and not just believe that we love or are loved because we have hundreds of Facebook friends. Or perhaps young people can learn from a woman by the name of Kathleen. Every Friday morning, Kathleen spends an hour playing Scrabble with a lovely 93-year-old lady in a local nursing home. On one such Friday, the elderly woman asked her this question. She said to Kathleen, "What do you think of doctor-assisted suicide?" And she pointed to an article from the paper on that very topic. Well, Kathleen responded that it's very sad that anyone should feel the need to take their life, and that it's our failure as a society when anyone is left feeling this way. So they discussed this for a time, and at one point, the elderly woman said to Kathleen that she herself can sympathize with people who don't feel that they have a reason to live. And she often wonders herself why God still has her stuck in this life. Kathleen, with tears in her eyes, told this 93-year-old woman what a joy she is to her and how she looks so forward to visiting with her every Friday morning. And the elderly woman teared up as well, and with shock in her eyes, she said to her, "Really? Is this true?" And Kathleen nodded. She wasn't able to get any more words out. And then the elderly woman responded, "Well, then perhaps there is reason enough for me to be here." Isn't it interesting that each one of us has that kind of power to give people a reason to be here? We don't have to move to the Sudan. We simply need to live out our love rather than just talk about it. Pope Francis just released a new pastoral letter, Gaudete et Exultate, Rejoice and Be Glad, which he really does address the spiritual hunger that these young people talk about. And he writes to us about the practical ways to feed our spiritual hunger. And he basically says small steps that include prayer, sacrifice, and service. And it's interesting, in his letter, he tells us that perhaps we've had an overemphasis on knowledge and rules, and now that we truly have to live out the message and not just learn the dogma. David Brooks, in his articles, tells us that our young people are longing for real connection, and that technology has disappointed them. Robert Hall, in his book, The Land of Strangers, points out that relationships are the most valuable and value-creating resource of any society. They are our lifelines to survive, to grow, and to thrive. Yet another article in The Atlantic by Jean Twenge, Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation? She charts the accelerating social collapse. And she tells us teenagers are spending more time alone with their digital screens, and the greater the screen time, the greater the unhappiness. That 8th graders who are heavy users of social media are 27% more likely to be depressed. So from David Brooks's question, how does a generation emerge from the wreckage? Well, it certainly isn't partying in a frat house, as we have so sadly learned in Syracuse, creating racist, sexist, and vile videos. But the scriptures tell us how. Francis tells us how. It's not by sitting in front of a computer screen thinking that we are connected. We have to interact and be present to real people, whether it's working in the Sudan or simply volunteering at the Samaritan Center or Francis House. Once again, isn't it amazing that each one of us here has the power to give people a reason to want to live. Francis tells us it's simple. It's prayer, sacrifice, and service.